So I get to talk about the fun stuff today, i.e. what's popular, and really unpack the term and talk about how we can use the term to create strategies within the workplace, right? So let me give you a quick overview of what I'll be doing today. First, I will talk about the language of diversity. What does it mean? What have researchers learned about the language of diversity and how effective it is? Then I will talk about intersectionality as a framework for change, right? I think one of the challenges diversity and inclusion programs have is they're not starting at the right place, and I'm going to show you why. Lastly, I will talk about the strategies, right? There's a lot of work women of color do, or other underrepresented groups do. When talking about what they need in the workplace, the work can't be on them anymore. And what I'm going to show you is how we can get to that place. So first, where we're starting. My focus today is to have a conversation. I'm going to explain the term, right? I've been here for about a year and a half, and what I have found is that people like using it, but really don't know its history, so I'm going to share it with you today. And then secondly, I'm going to identify some actions you can engage it with in your workplace to make it better. Okay, to start, why your diversity program may not be working. First, the language of diversity programs fall into two categories. They focus on difference or they focus on equality. For example, difference. We recognize that everyone benefits from the knowledge and experience of diverse cultures. We heard a little bit about that this morning on the first panel. Or equality. All persons without regard to differences among them shall be respected or valued. So the question is, do we highlight differences or do we highlight equality? What researchers have shown is, in terms of performance and persistence, when you highlight difference, white women benefit. When you highlight equality, black men and women benefit, right? So if we can't highlight difference, if we can't highlight equality, what do we do, right? Because diversity is not about gender, not just about gender, it's about all forms of diversity. And we'll unpack what I mean by all forms. Okay, so let's start with intersectionality. Who here has heard the term intersectionality? Who knows its definition? Oh, that was good. It went from like 60% to like 10%. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to give you a definition. It's an analytic framework coined in the late 1980s, but it really is a term that I think summarizes almost a decade of black feminist thought, right? Kimberly Crenshaw's goal was to talk about how can black women advocate for themselves. When it came to civil rights courses, they either had sex or race as options to choose, and what she found is neither of them worked. So what options do women of color have if they have to pick one? So her push for social policy was, we have to account for the multiple dimensions of identity because they create unique discrimination experiences. And so if we use that as a point of departure, identifying the intersections and how they operate, then we can create policies that improve the culture of, I don't know, a workplace, for example. Okay, so I'll show you where she started, right? So right now, intersectionality in the late 80s, early 90s, right, was here. In tech, it's more like this, right? It's a mess. It's race, it's gender, it's migration status, it's whether or not you're an introvert, it's whether or not you're here on an H-1B visa. How do we account for all these differences, all these things that affect the people who work in tech to really create a diversity and inclusion program at these companies that really improve the lives of everyone, right? One of the other things the gentleman right here talked about today, how do we talk about equity? My argument is we start with intersectionality. We start with identifying how these multiple identities intersect, create systems of privilege and oppression that then define people's workplace experiences. Because if we do that, then we can talk about the strategies that really make things better for everyone, right? I think one of the things that strikes me about conversations about diversity and inclusion is, well, it's just for minorities, it's just for women. No, it's not. I was talking to a diversity and inclusion officer today, and we were talking about those departments are responsible for improving the entire workplace culture. And what I've found here in my year and a half is that sometimes organizations only, if they have a full-time staff person, it's 1 or 3 per like thousands of employees. How do you do that? How does that work? If they're tasked with improving the entire workplace culture and you have a staff of 3, what does that mean for its success? What does it mean for workplace culture? And what does it mean for the well-being of the workers? Okay, key themes. Sorry, are we good so far? Yeah. Following me? Yeah. I get really excited. Okay. So first, like I said, key themes in intersectional research. 1, multidimensional identities, right? It's not just race, it's not just sex, it's sexuality, it's ability, it's all these things. 2, visibility, right? Some of the women of color this morning talked about what it meant to be the only one, or how do they navigate, or how do they even name it? Can I call sexism for what it is? Can I call racism for what it is, right? Do I make it visible? And how does me making it visible affect my visibility in the company? Am I just a woman of color who's the affirmative action hire, right? Or am I actually bringing value to the table? Next, knowledge and work, right? I'll share a personal experience, right? So I'm the only PhD of color among my fantastic colleagues, and it's great. And some of my friends were like, do you know what you're getting into? You're going to be the one. You're going to be the face of diversity. And I was like, yes, but I get the privilege of working in a place that allows me to do the work, and it's a supportive environment, and it's an environment where I can grow. Because they value the contribution that I make to their research agenda. And the question is, are your companies doing that with your employees, right? Because the thing is people, right, it's been said a lot today. People from different experiences bring a variety of different knowledge bases, and the question is, are you leveraging that? Are you really using that to improve the technology that you're producing, the workplace culture that you're trying to foster? Fourth, resource allocation, right? Where are you putting the resources? I have to be honest, when I first got here, and as someone who studies women of color, and to enter diversity spaces, and it's conversations about women, I'm like, but wait, there's so many other dimensions. How do we begin to invest in these other dimensions of difference? Because they matter. And because if we use an intersectional lens, what we do learn is by looking at how these intersections operate, right, and investing in all those forms of difference, we really do improve everything for everyone. Lastly, belonging, right? I've been engaged in research on the experience of women of color in tech, and it hurts me to hear stories of how women of color struggle with loving their job and feeling like they're valued and feeling like they belong there. They could be trained in the field. They could have all this experience. It blows me away the diversity of experiences some of these women have, and when they enter their workplace, they're only valued for like 10% of what they bring to the table. And why is that? Why is their knowledge not being valued? Why are they only working in certain sectors or in certain projects? Like, how do we leverage the richness that people from different backgrounds bring to the organization to improve workplace culture? Which moves me to the next thing about diversity management and women's leadership. So here, I'm going to tell you what matters and what's missing. So researchers who studied, does this work? No. Okay. So people who research diversity management programs, have identified a couple things. What matters? We've heard the word accountability a lot today. Yes? Okay. It's also a combination of programming. It's not just your diversity officer. It's your employee resource groups. It's events like today and other things. Third, your relationship with your managers. The women of color I've interviewed, the number one reason they leave is because they had a horrible manager. Or their manager, or if they transferred divisions within an organization, they lost favor with their manager. Right? We all know that mentoring and sponsorship is huge. But if, I'm going to be a little crass here, right? But if one manager loses his token woman of color to another team and then gets mad at her and doesn't monitor her anymore, what is that going to mean for her relationship with the organization? She's going to go somewhere where she's valued. Lastly, job ladder transparency. When I ask these women how they're going to move up the corporate ladder, whether it's in tech, whether it's in finance, the ones who don't know, right? What does that mean? They get stuck. They don't know what to ask for. And then it's a matter of figuring out, do I stay here? Do I not? How do I manage these relationships? The work the women of color have to engage in to, one, legitimize their work, legitimize their existence, and then figure out how to climb the corporate ladder. Because let's be clear, we want to get paid. It's just a lot. When really all they want to do is produce. When all they want to do is contribute to the bottom line. And if they're doing all this extra work before they even think about how they're contributing to the bottom line, what does that mean to the organization's potential? Now, for my review of the literature, what's missing? A contemporary assessment of staff goals, which I will get to in a second. How is the program being created? Right? A lot of this research is done post-civil rights, i.e. how corporations created affirmative action policies to be in line with what the government wanted. But how about these organic projects, right? When we talk about ERGs, we talk about, is it top-down or is it bottom-up, right? Which is the more effective strategy? And I'm eager to talk about that later today. Lastly, thirdly, broadening definitions or criteria for leadership, right? The research the center has done over the last 3 years has found that the language women are evaluated with, or the language used for women and how they're evaluated it doesn't work either way, right? They can have the leadership qualities and they won't get promoted, or they don't have the qualities, or they have these communal qualities and they're not getting promoted, right? So how do we learn to value the variety of skills, right? There's something about being able to engage with the team. There is something about being able to build good relationships, right? It's not just the assertive, sort of masculine prototype of a leader, but how do we identify what those are and value those, right? We talked a lot about company values today. And how do we get these different forms of leadership incorporated into our values, incorporated into our performance evaluations, to then really just leverage the variety of skills people are bringing to the table. Right, redesigning work. I mean, the age of people I've talked to over the last year, I have my young people who like showering at work. I have my older people who are like, I need to find people who look like me outside of my workplace, or I need to find a way to buy a house in the community, right? How does work respond to the needs of the variety of their staff? Approaches to diversity management, actually using intersectionality, which is what I've been doing at the lab for the last year and a half. And so with that, one more thing, their career goals, right? We talk about the pipeline. We talk about people not having the skills. We talk about women just having different needs. They're mothers. They have to take care of kids. This is my favorite. So background. My research before I got to the lab was on immigrant services in suburban Chicago. And one of my chapters was dedicated to the career pathways of women in the nonprofit industry. And then when I started this research on women of color in tech, I came across this paper co-authored by Stacey Blakebeard, who spoke earlier today, and I was like, oh my God, there's a quantitative analysis of all the things. And I want to point out a few things. This is a survey done of MBA grads on the East Coast. And they were asked what they wanted from the workplace, right? Let's look at a few things. Intellectual challenge. Over 90% of every racial group wants to be intellectually challenged at the workplace. We're not talking about family leave, not that that's not important. We're not talking about any other feminine activities. They really own that they're brilliant and want to continue to be brilliant. Second, they want to develop skills and expertise. They are hungry to learn, and they are hungry to contribute, right? With Asians being over 95% in this category. Personal relationships. Latinas of all the groups are the highest in terms of wanting personal relationships. It's about that sense of community in the workplace. I would easily argue it's not just women who want healthy relationships in the workplace, but the question is all the decisions are being made at the bar with the guys who don't have kids or who have people at home taking care of their kids. What does it mean for the woman who decides to go home? Because she can't decide. Because sometimes if a woman has a nanny, nanny's got it, I'm going to go to the bar. But you have to invite her to the bar. I'm just saying. Fourth, meet financial obligations. I mean, women want to get paid. I don't want to talk about the gender pay gap today. We all know the numbers. We all know they're horrible. But the thing is that there's a need to meet financial needs. And again, with white women being at the top, every other group is above 85%. They want to be recognized. Again, it blows me away that we're having a conversation about how do we recruit, how do we retain. The thing is that there's a knowledge base. When I think about the young Stanford undergrad who spoke this morning talking about, why do I have to fight? I'm a Stanford engineer. Why is it such an issue that I can't be recruited on my merit? Let's think about that. Young talent at probably one of the most competitive schools, the dream pedigree, but somehow she still has to explain why she needs to get recruited a lot harder maybe than some of the bros in the room. Tech, bro culture, we following? Yes. Okay, great. Let's talk about children, right? We talk about children being an impediment for women. There's assumptions about that women have children, right? What about those of us who don't, right? Especially when I think about women of color and how women of color who are credentialed are putting off marriage, are putting off having children at a much higher rate than their white counterparts, right? What happens to us if the numbers are so low, right? None of these numbers are above 75%, right? And my favorite, when I think about who leads companies, and let's talk about women leading companies, Black women are at the highest percentage of wanting to be in leadership positions, but I don't see them, right? As I've loved the research I do, I get to meet a lot of fantastic, brilliant women of color, but I'll tell you this, try to find black women in tech, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. But they want to lead, right? And the ones I've interviewed, like I've met at different events, they leave the tech industry because it's so toxic. But they want to run things. What are you doing with people who are hungry to run your organizations, to create workplace cultures that are inclusive, or just like badass, to be quite frank, and you're pushing them out? Lastly, status, right? The numbers are low for almost every group except Asians. And so my data set does include Asian women, and people are like, well, they're not underrepresented. I was like, they're underrepresented in leadership, right? They want the status in their organization. And when I think about the women I've interviewed, were like, I had to take time off because I was having kids and I had to work part-time. This one woman blew me away. She was working at 60%, was told she was contributing at full-time, and never thought about asking for a promotion, but was also never given one, right? If she's contributing the same extent as another counterpart who's not staying at home, who is working full-time, and is not getting rewarded and not getting recognized, it stalls her career. It stalls her potential, and it stalls her contributions to the organization. So my question to you is, does this resonate with anyone? And so what I'm hoping to talk about today is how we can use this information to create strategies. And in order to do that, I'm going to give you a few. So first, make the invisible visible, right? One of my favorite things about the slide with the numbers is it makes visible that women, and women of color specifically, have a lot to contribute, and want to climb within these organizations, right? So we can't talk about anymore where they're not there, they don't want to be there, like it's hard to find them. The numbers exist, right? And then now I'm collecting the stories to flesh out those numbers and to help us understand what those numbers actually mean and what the experiences of women in tech actually are, right? So we want to define the most relevant intersecting dimensions. We want to avoid creating false equivalencies. The journalist this morning talked a lot about power, money, and influence, right? So how do we analyze power structures within organizations that create privilege and oppression or oppressive circumstances, and then debunk those structures and create something new? And then we also have to start with questions. Who's being overlooked? Who is not having access to equal opportunity? What data approaches are possible beyond survey and statistics, right? I can give you the numbers, but I get to sit for an hour and a half with many of these women, sometimes longer, because they have a lot to tell me, who tell me their stories. It moves me that, one, some of these women have never shared their stories. Two, that they don't know that they are not the only ones. The degree of isolation some of these women face, whether it's along gender lines, race lines, migration lines, I mean, sometimes I have to take a minute or a few hours to process what it means to be that vulnerable with me in an hour and a half. Right, new data frontiers. Some practitioners are mapping how information and influence are shared in the company to expand access to networks and resources. There need, as my colleague Stacey Blake Beard said earlier in October, there needs to be a real cultural assessment about what the problem is and what needs to be done. This process is not easy, it's not quick, and it's definitely not cheap. Strategy 2. We have to learn from the past to inform the future. When I started, I was like, I need to know what I'm walking into, right? I had the opportunity to go to several events on diversity. I had the opportunity to talk to several diversity officers at tech companies to really understand where the conversation was. If we're going to design an intervention, if we're going to design a program, we have to know what's existed, right? Especially when I think about the experiences of professional women of color, what strikes me is like, well, I'm the first one. We were probably the first one in 10 to 15 years. Because there's probably a history behind you, and you don't know it because they left, and that knowledge wasn't passed down, right? So how do companies excavate, right, what's been going on in their companies, who's existed, who's left, and why, to then inform their improvements to their diversity strategies? Whose shoulders are we standing on? Third, educate. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition for change, right? And education goes both ways. Right? A lot of women of color, when they enter predominantly white workspaces, have a lot of work to do to explain how they can exist in that space. No, I'm not an affirmative action student, for example, or no, I'm not a token hire. Like, I actually have skills to bring to this table. But it's not just that, right? It's like, how do we engage? How do people in more privileged positions engage others, right? How do you learn to ask those questions? Because you can ask. There are ways to ask questions, and you have to be careful, and I encourage you to ask advice about how to ask questions, because if you ask the wrong way, you will offend people. And you have to couple education with process changes and accountability mechanisms, right? When women of color enter predominantly white workspaces, whether or not they're conscious of it, there's just a lot of explaining to do. Some have it more than others, but how do we alleviate that burden, right? I get to help them identify the fact that it is extra work, but I'm in that privileged position. But maybe some people don't have access to people like me in their spaces, and so how do organizations cultivate those kinds of conversations? And it just can't be HR. It can't be your diversity people. It has to be embedded within the organization across divisions. Fourth, experiment. Stanford is like the capital of experimental design. But organizations should be too, right? I think tech, it's a booming industry. It's all about innovation and creativity. So do that with how you create diversity programming. It might not always be successful, but you have to test your boundaries to see what works and what doesn't. Because each tech company has its own culture, right? Every time someone asks me, like, what do you do? I was like, well, I have to learn how your organization operates before I can give you advice as to where to start, right? But we have to start with the organization's values and how to use the values to leverage an improvement on your diversity programming, right? It can't just be a quick fix. There has to be a permanent state of continuous improvement, okay? So, I mean, like any technological product, right? It's always changing. How many iPhones have we had in the last 7 years, right? Diversity programming should be that active, should be that fluid. Lastly, allyship, right? We've talked about a lot about allies. How do we engage allies? How do we find allies? It's not just white men, right? Like I'm in a space where gender is the point of departure for talking about diversity, but as the mail said this morning, there aren't a lot of Black and Hispanic women here today. The question is why? I'll be honest, when I got to California, right, California used to be Mexico, and the numbers of Latinas in the tech industry are abysmal. I was like, wait, that doesn't make any sense, because last I checked, Latinos like dominate the state of California. So someone needs to explain to me why natives can't enter the tech industry. Because interviewing Latinas, a lot of the Latinas I interviewed who work in tech are from the Bay. So what is it that tech companies are doing or not doing that they can attract local talent? And I'm not going to talk about STEM fields because that's a bigger conversation. But a lot of tech organizations, a lot of your staff is not technical, right? So you can hire people in psych, you can hire people in social sciences, you can hire people in the humanities. And so what's really going on that's not translating, right? Just a question. Right? Sometimes it's about just going to a handful of people with power. Then you have 3 or 4 people doing things differently, right? So I'm going to ask my white women, diversify your networks. I'm going to ask people with power, right? You know who you are. And if you don't know you have power, you probably do. What are you doing to bring people up? What are you doing to leverage that power? I mean, I had the fortune of working at Stanford University, doing research on intersectionality, telling you how intersectionality can work in corporate America. So as much as my social activist friends were like, what are you doing working at Stanford? I was like, I get to have this conversation and have this platform to talk about how my students, my colleagues can have access to these organizations and feel comfortable, right? I mean, I love my job. It's awesome. I have fun every day. And it hurts me to interview skilled, talented women who are hungry for more, that they don't have that experience in the workplace, right? I work with women who support me, who support each other, and who are about furthering women, right? But what's going on in these other spaces where one company, right, was it Workday that said they were 49% women? I just ask, because I don't know, how are we leveraging our power in numbers? Lastly, I'm just so excited. Okay, anticipate and plan for backlash. We're experimenting. Sometimes experiments don't work. I moved from Chicago. I was not done with my PhD when I got the job offer. I had to rush, finish the dissertation in a month, figure out how I was going to move, find a roommate, do the budget, because Silicon Valley is more expensive than Chicago, and I was all about being economically mobile. Real talk. Yes. And so I was like, okay, one of my best friends from college lived here. I had friends throughout the Bay Area. And I was like, if nothing works out, I'll figure it out. I'm pretty resilient, raised by a single mom. It's what we do. Put a team in place and a process for responding to external and internal events. Every day I was on the phone with my family, talking about how it was going, how it wasn't going. My mom came out here for a week before I started because she needed to know where I was landing, because this was a huge move, and when your job is at Stanford, you're going to take your mom to Stanford, yes? So I have to figure out how to tap into your resources, how to leverage those resources when things don't work out. Again, luckily it worked out for me, but I also think I had the tools in place, I had the support in place, and I worked into an environment that was excited to have me, and I was excited to be there, right? But there was a response on both sides. There's an engagement on both sides, and when I didn't feel uncomfortable, I had a place to go, I had a space to go, and we worked from there. Now this is the last one, I promise. Okay. So small wins, right? Measure success in small wins. You're not going to fix everything overnight, right? Less than 1% of Latinas have PhDs. My twin sister and I both have PhDs. People are like, how did you do that? We're like raised by a single mother. And we were lucky enough because we had each other throughout the process, right? And while our career paths are very different, the fact that we finished the PhD, even when people weren't expecting us to, when people raised questions about what we were doing, right? Because when your grandmother didn't go past third grade and you're still in school in your 20s, she's like, what are you doing? Why aren't you employed? You're like, I like school. Like a PhD, it's a long-term, deep commitment, yes? And to give you an example of how to celebrate a small win, right? It's a difficult but successful conversation. An event where seemingly different groups learn from each other, right? Having your CEO take a stand. Even when the CEO comes out and says, this is important, we're going to do this, right? That's a small win. So how do you capitalize off of that? How do you capitalize those difficult conversations that do produce insights to keep the ball rolling? Because this is not easy, right? And how do you keep that energy up, right? Layla this morning talked about that, igniting that fire, right? And I would see if you're all in here, you're all committed to diversity and inclusion, you have that fire, that spark is in there. So how do you keep going? How do you leverage the energy in the room? To summarize, okay. 1, to fix challenges, make the invisible visible. Storytelling and fostering empathy are key mechanisms to facilitate inclusion. Learn from the past and couple education with process changes. Allyship. Let's stop talking about yes, it's the CEO. Yes, we want him on our side, but how do we leverage people across the organization from different backgrounds to plant those seeds, right? And lastly, measure success in small wins. Thank you. Questions, comments? Yes, Dominique.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi.
So, also, but how often do you have this conversation in rooms predominantly filled with men or with people in power or executive leaders? We know much of this discussion.
Right.
Thank you for the details. But how do we get this to the folks who are in power, as Connie mentioned earlier?
I don't, right? I think I meant to start with this. I'm very aware that I'm probably preaching to the choir. But for me, it was important to have if we're going to have a conversation about intersectionality, I needed to make sure we were starting from the same point, right? I know we could talk about this all day, done. However, I'm not going to make that assumption, right? So the question is how do you answer a conversation and not make assumptions? I started at the bare minimum because it was important, because I'm very aware that I wanted to start with the basics. I didn't come and give you a research presentation about what I'm finding, because that wasn't going to be effective. I needed to make sure that when I'm talking about intersectionality, we're all departing from the same point. But to answer your question about when I'm in a room, I've only maybe done it once, which I was very excited to do because they invited me and I got to make people uncomfortable, which is always fun. I wish there were more opportunities, right? But the question is, and I'll ask you, how many of you are inviting my colleagues and I to come talk about intersectionality? Because we can, right? And have that conversation and have it supported by research and like really a commitment to improving diversity, both through research and through practice. Does that answer your question? Okay, thanks. Yes.
Hi, thanks for speaking.
Hold on, we have Mike.
I'm going to run around. Great job. So, a question I have for you,
Sure.
you presented these strategies.
Yes.
Have you seen them in action?
Not yet.
Why? Do you think?
I've only been here a year and a half.
Okay.
So let's start there. These strategies were first presented in October. Actually, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to start with myself, right? My colleagues did all this research on women in leadership, right? And they're like, wait, we're missing a lot of stuff, right? Because let's be clear, we're among friends. When people talk about interventions across gender, they're usually meeting one group, yes? And they're like, yep, we got to fix this. We got to find someone who does this. And so it took them a few months to find me. And so they made the invisible visible, right? They're like, okay, we need someone who does intersectionality. Then storytelling and fostering empathy, right? They didn't ask me about my credentials. They asked me about the work. They asked me what I wanted to do, right? Because they gave me room to tell my story. They learned from the, right? And when I came in, right, knowing that I was the one, many of us have been there, yes. It's like, where do I start? Because they want me here, and there's room to grow. So I had an intersectionality reading group with my colleagues. Why? Because I wanted to get to know my colleagues, have a conversation, and know that I could not be the one to talk about intersectionality, because we all know what that emotional labor looks like, and I wasn't about that life. And they were interested. They read. We had conversations for hours about what it meant. And it was also me learning the history of their efforts to engage in intersectionality, right? They invited Kimberly Crenshaw to campus right before I started. I was very sad that I missed the talk. It's okay. And then I'm here, right? They didn't know where to point me, but I'm creative, and I'm used to being the one. So I was like, all right, I know where to start. I'm just going to go to all these things. And luckily, we had a few friends of color, right, professional associations who were like, oh, you have someone cool. They didn't know what they were getting, and they're like, this is for real. Great. So as I became visible, I respected where people were, I respected what I was inheriting, and I not only brought them up, but by bringing them up, I also brought myself up, right? So it was that process. But I'm on a team of a dozen people, right? I'm hoping to see more of that, right? These storytellings. But how do we create room when a lot of the people I've talked to like work in isolation? I don't know. I'm willing to work and have conversations about how to make that happen. But I really do think it's like, how do we manage that, right? Like a lot of people talk to, well, startups, they don't think about diversity at the onset. I was like, well, that's crazy because they should. But I take that for granted, right? And so how do we just asking the right questions as early as possible and pushing it forward and building it into the culture from as early as possible. Does that answer? Okay. Yes.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi.
You interviewed me for the Ally Career Trajectory study, and so I wanted to stitch a couple things together. First of all, I want to find out, where that's led, if there are any conclusions from that work that you were doing, and then, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot with that, but I'm interested in how do you build allies, or how do you develop allies? We have a high school scholars program that Latrice and I and one other person here at VMware started with the Black Pod and the Latinos Pod, and this year the Pride Pod is joining, and we're trying to build that spirit of advocating for each other and everybody recognizing that they're all in the minority in tech. So anyway, allyship, how do you foster that? It seems like in the younger generation, it's just part of their DNA anyway, but maybe not so much once people are in their 30s and 40s and beyond.
How do you foster that? I think it's like by doing what you just did, which is sharing your story, number one. Number two, I remember when I got asked a similar question a few months ago. It's like, for example, so when I walk into a predominantly white space, I have to explain myself and why I exist and how I exist, right? And so, how about we flipped it, right? What would happen if, and it was mentioned earlier today, if someone from a privileged position walked into an ERG and said, "I have no idea what's going on, but I want to help," right? That's one way to do it, right? And I think when I hear conversations about ERGs, well, I don't feel welcome, and I don't do this, and I don't do that, I was like, no, you're welcome. You are welcome. You're experiencing what many of us experience on a daily basis, right? And so how do we get people like yourself who know, nope, we're going to have to get uncomfortable and sit in discomfort into those conversations? Because I think when I think about how ERG started, whether they're from the top down or from the bottom up, there's just so much work in organizing them and finding the space and finding the right narrative, because There's people who check the boxes and are like black because it's convenient, and there are people who like embody it and live it on a daily basis, and there's all those politics to navigate, right? But that's work. And they have to create a safe space for everyone and connect with everyone. And it can't just be about Cinco de Mayo parties. It has to be about leveraging leadership development, right? Let's just keep it real. And so what I would say is, no, people who don't feel welcome in those spaces, I challenge you to get uncomfortable, because that's where it starts. And to answer your question about the research, it's still ongoing. Okay. Which one? This one first?
Right here.
And then I'm going to go here. Okay, great. Hi.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Great. I'm fantastic.
I just want to say that representation is so important, and it's very cool to hear someone speak from a we perspective that you identify with. So thank you, first and foremost. Secondly, I missed the first 5 minutes, so I sincerely apologize. If this has been answered, just say skip. But I'm curious, as we look at words like intersectionality, I don't want to say how the word was colonized to represent all.
I missed it. Oh, I definitely.
You went in there? You went in there? Okay, beautiful.
Yes.
But I'm curious, what can specifically white women do to ensure that those kinds of acts don't happen again? And when we talk about the second wave and third wave of feminism, what can white women do to ensure that they're actually being all inclusive versus coming in and taking up space?
All right. So I'll say this, right? Again, I do work on diversity, and I work with, what some people have told me is a second wave feminist organization. And I'm like, but they're paying me to have this conversation. So let's have a minute. So one is investing in the conversation, right? Not just having the presence. I think they open doors. And the question is how do we use that? How do we, women of color, use that, right? And I think it's, to your point, it's a dynamic process, right? Again, you have no idea how much work I had to engage in when I first started to be like, but they're like lean in. But what are you doing there? Like, just too much. And let's be clear, this is work from outside. This is not my colleague. This is not anybody, this is what I had to encounter. And so it's one, recognizing we as women of color, where can we enter the conversation? Two, they don't know what they don't know. So how do we talk to them when they have that platform to then build on their platform and engage as partners, right? I'm fortunate enough that I can engage with my colleagues as partners. I also very understand that I am like, people are like, that's not, I understand, I'm in a special place, it's magical, it's great, I know that. So that's one side. I think the other side for white women, it's, I don't know what I don't know, help me. I mean, really, starting conversations like, I don't know, because I think about the vulnerability. I mean, moving from Chicago to California with this crazy rant as I'm trying to be great and trying to be financially stable was really psychologically, it was intense. But they were helpful every step of the way because I asked. Granted, I knew what to ask, which is a whole other conversation. But they helped me. So it's, I don't know, help me. This is for our white women allies. How do we start? And I want to respect you. And it's a constant negotiation. It's work, but it's a constant negotiation of how do I say, I exist, my knowledge matters, and I'm going to make this more powerful, we as women of color. But we're still partners in this. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of conversation. It's a lot of vulnerability, but the parties in this conversation have to meet there. Does that? Okay. One up here, and then up there. Yes. Hello.
Hi, Melissa.
Thank you for your patience.
No, thank you for your passion. So I have two things.
Awesome.
First thing is, can I invite you to speak to my leadership team?
Sure.
As at VMware.
Yes.
So I'll follow up with you on that.
Fantastic.
And the reason why I'm asking for that is one of the things that's bothered me a lot when I think about diversity and inclusion is we tend to scorecard it, right? And we basically put metrics and we say, hey, we're at some odd percentage here and some other percentage there. And now let's get this percentage up to the other one. And your second bullet point was about storytelling and narratives. And I find that to be so powerful. In fact, VMware as an organization has spent almost $40 million this year in a sales kickoff teaching our sales guys how to tell a story so they can sell software. But when it comes to people, we're going to put a scorecard together, right? So how can we get better at making this into a narrative and about the people and, you know, the fact that we're talking about a community and humans?
That's a very good question. That's big. For several, also, I'll share a bit of my story, which will then explain this. So in many ways, people are like, how do you fit in Stanford? I was like, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. Because Stanford does experiments, I do not. They're about surveys, quantifiable data, big data, blah, blah, blah. I don't do that. I collect stories, and I sit in the mess. I sit in the mess and figure out what it means and create a theory from that. That is a lot of work, a lot of patience, but it's a good fight. I think, one, redefining how we think of science, right, which is a very big fight. Experiments are valuable, but they don't, like, how do we figure out what to test? You're not going to figure out what to test or what to manipulate until you get the stories, right? So I think it's encouraging people who are big fans of data to think about, we don't understand what the data is until we, like, sit in it for a while, right? So as much as I got very little direction when I started, it was actually probably the best thing because it really just started from the ground up. And I just was like, I study nonprofits, I study immigrants, you're going to have to, like, explain stuff to me. So I think it's opening ourselves up to moving away from the big data sexiness right now and talking about the ground and talking about the everyday because I think that's what's missing with these metrics. And I think it's taking a bigger risk, which is saying we're going to put metrics on a pause for a while because we don't even know what we're measuring. Because numbers aren't enough, right? To go back to the man earlier this morning who talked about equity, I think it's talking about the culture and the structure and how it creates privilege and marginalization. It's that conversation that's going to improve everything for everyone. Because I would easily argue that, you know, women are not the only ones concerned with children or isolation or any of these things, right? It's where the conversation is because that's where the funding is going because that's what funded this fantastic event. But I really do think it's like, how do we change processes, right? The research the lab has been doing for the last 3 years was about performance evaluations, but there's an entire pipeline. Right? It's not just about hiring and recruiting. Like, let's stop because you get people through the door and then they leave because it's so toxic. Like, why are people leaving? Why don't we have that conversation? So it's just moving away from the tradition. But to move away from the tradition, you have to start from scratch. And to start from scratch, you're going to have to put big data on hold. Is that okay? I don't know. You tell me.
I think her.
Okay. I'm going to dance.
I'll do it.
I like dancing. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for coming to VMware.
No, thank you for coming.
I love your energy. It's
Thanks.
really, it's very uplifting. So I just want to make a statement based on what I faced in working in tech.
Yes.
And this is based on the question you asked as to what other women or white women can do to raise people up. And when I first got hired at VMware, I was one of the quiet ones in the corner and making sure that everybody else spoke and had lots of ideas but never spoke up. But then eventually, as I kind of grew in my career, I found women who said, one director who said, next time you have an idea, you look at me, and once you look at me, I'll make everybody stop. And you have to speak. And she made me speak regardless whether I liked it or not. And now I've become in the habit of actually saying what exactly I feel. And then I kind of built that self-confidence. And the other thing is that she knew I was not getting paid enough. And she stood up for me. And that is something that is people who are in the position of power, they can do that for you. So it could be anybody, black, white, but they need to do that for other women. And now I do that for the people I lead as well. So it's teaching by example. Thank you.
Who's next?
Right behind you.
Which one? I don't know.
Oh, I thought there was some.
No, it's you, Vinny.
Okay. I want to say one thing to that. Like, the number of women I've interviewed who are like, well, I'm just too quiet. I can't do this. It's like, it's not in me. I'm like, If you would talk to the 10 other women I interviewed before you, you would know that it's not you. Okay, go.
So just a quick comment.
Yes.
I've heard now 3 times that the one thing that white women can do is to diversify their network.
Yes.
And I see lots of diverse backgrounds.
Yes.
So connect with me. I'm Kelsey Layton, Leighton. connect with me on LinkedIn, and I want to help you. I want to get you where you want to go. I work at Seagate. Not super exciting, but connect with me. Yep, come on.
All right. Thank you.
And my question is, where do you think inclusion efforts are going to be in the tech industry 5 years from now?
Oh.
Good question.
You're really smart, so.
Please tell us the future.
You know, you hear it from your mother, and you're like, Mom, you just say that because you're my mom. I can tell you where I want it to be, and then I can tell you where I think it will be. I want it to be a mess in 5 years. And I want it to be in a mess in 5 years because what is being done is not working. And like I said before, it's not easy, and it's going to take a long time. And I want it to be messy because that means people are experimenting with strategies. The strategies may not be working or working in some ways. And I think it's all hands on, right? All hands, that's a tech thing, the Silicon Valley thing. It needs to be all hands on deck. And sometimes you have too many cooks in the kitchen, but it's a negotiation process. So because of all of that, I think it's going to be messy. Am I the pessimist? I don't think it's going to get messy. I think the big data, the sexiness of big data is ruining innovation in this space. I wish more people had diversity officers. It blows me away. We're like, oh, we have diversity council that started 3 months ago. And I'm like, wait, finance industry has been having diversity officers for like decades. So what's really going on in tech? Because as much as people in tech are saying they're different from finance, in some ways they are, in many ways they're not. Because capitalism in corporate America is still capitalism in corporate America. And so I really and that's why I love what I do, because I get to like say these things and people get to listen and maybe take it back to work. Maybe. So I really hope it gets messy. Yes. Other questions?
Okay, so
Oh, my friend. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
I'll stand up. I'm going to try not to be long-winded because I think I have a little bit more of a statement more than anything. To touch on what you said, how women, particularly white women, can, I guess, get more insight. There was a conference that took place a few weeks ago, the United States of Women, and I want to say I think it was in Los Angeles, and Jane Fonda gave an amazing speech. So if you have time, Google it. I think it's like a hashtag USOW 2018 or something. But she basically spoke about something what you said, and you started with, I don't know. And she said, I didn't know, and I did the research, and I think a lot of it is misunderstanding. So the goal and the objective is to get understanding, and you don't get understanding unless you go and seek the knowledge and seek the information. So instead of saying, I don't know, or if you're going to say, I don't know, say, I don't know, but I'm going to look into it. I'm going to find out and actually take the action and make those steps, because that's how the change is going to happen. So.
And I just want to say that Suzanne here did that very thing that everybody is asking about. Stand up, Suzanne. Suzanne came to my office, and Suzanne said, I'm a white woman. I see that there are... I see that there is not enough black representation here at this company. What can I do? She understood that she had to stay in a certain lane, but she also understood that we can use her to open the door. Now, when she opened certain doors, I'll knock everybody down in them, but she had to open the door, and I think that that is very, very critical and key. So I wanted to say that she's actually here doing the work. Very grateful.
I want to share one thing. Wait, can we just applaud you for it? We will go back to her story, but I wanted to get your question because you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you. I keep changing my questions because people keep asking awesome questions, and there's so much amazing content from your presentation. Awesome. Yeah, I love it. So my question is around like dealing with backlash without feeling like you need to defend the like diversity and inclusion efforts. Like for some context, like my company's been working like pretty aggressively to hire women, which I fully support, but as like I think some people perceive it might be like too aggressive, and the tactics that they're using, I personally am on the fence about. So like, for example, the last like 3 or 4 hires in my rather small department have been women, when like, I think we're like 10% of I'm a mechanical engineer. So it's not a lot of women here. But I'd love for there to be more of a diverse company in general. So, I want to fight for those efforts, but my boyfriend and I get in arguments of like, well, it's like another woman. They're just trying to check the boxes. I'm like, which they might be trying to do, but we need them. It's like I'm one of 4 women in my department, so.
I think it's flipping the script, right? Because I hear you, right? And I've heard that a lot in these spaces, especially for people who want to be devil's advocates. I'm sorry. Let's take a step back and talk about her resume, right? First of all, women have been outnumbering men in bachelor's degrees, right, this morning, over 30 years, right? So why are you making the assumption that all of a sudden because she's a woman, she's not as capable, or if not more capable than male behind her, right? Because let's be clear, for women to crack that ceiling, she has to be more skilled, right? The study, if I were to present you audit studies after audit studies of whether it's race or gender, males will always do better, white people will always do better, even if it's the same resume, right? And so there's all this work that we have to do to like translate that, cover that, whatever. And so, no, I push back. Push back and flip the conversation. Why are you assuming she's not qualified?
Yeah, most of the time I'm like, oh, you're so offended that there's like one more woman in the department. But it's like baby steps.
And
baby
diversity,
steps.
I mean, again, when you increase difference in the workplace, yeah, it may be uncomfortable, but the atmosphere overall improves greatly.
For
so,
sure.
Yeah. I have one.
I have like one sentence.
Okay, can we do one sentence and then 2 questions? Yes. And I'm available after. Okay.
So my one sentence is the quick success story, which Hazel doesn't even know about, but we had a conversation about me coming out to Atlanta and just sitting there and being an ally and being a presence there to show support. And it didn't fly. And at first I was kind of disappointed until my VP announced to his whole group that there was a new goal that was required for you to meet in Workday, and that is that you will include people of color from underrepresented groups in your interview pool and in your short list. So we don't get to have lunch together in Atlanta, I'm sorry, but I think we're going to have a better impact overall. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much for talking about
No
intersectionality.
problem. Thank you for coming. I appreciate your comment earlier today.
Thank you. I'm a consultant myself, and based off all the categories I saw you look at, I always talk to. I want to know your feeling about mentorship versus sponsorship, because I kind of counsel or consult a lot of my companies now to focus kind of more on sponsorship than mentorship. For me, mentorship kind of denotes a power structure. If I'm a mentor and I'm especially a white male, I'm in a position of power, so I have to impart some kind of wisdom on a mentee, when really there is that reverse mentoring, data shows. But sponsorship is what elevates someone's social capital.
Yep.
And I think that's even more important. I don't know for you ladies in the room too. I know I've looked up to people at my companies and I'm like, oh, I need to learn from you. And you like go work with that person. You're like, I know more than they're like half doing stuff and like floating, skating by. And you're up here like thinking they're going to give you some, and they're just taking a cakewalk. So what are your thoughts on kind of the mentorship versus sponsorship thing?
Okay. Several. Where do I start? Okay, so I agree with you, right? I will use myself as an example and to make a larger case. So for me, mentorship is about leverage. Okay, so I'm super confident. I know I'm fantastic, and I know I can do a lot of things. Who's going to help me get there, right? And so, but I also know that there are people who want to feel this sort of hierarchy. So I play with it because it's play. For me, it's play. I'm aware of that play, and I think for people who are seeking mentors, it would be, my advice to them would be like, know it's a game, and know how to play the game, right? And it's work, and it's figuring out how do I leverage the fact that I know I'm fantastic with they want to help someone who's fantastic. When I work with young people of color, I always tell them, I was like, especially as they're first generation students, I was like, look, you just go into an office and you say, I want this, and you're doing all these things, and you share their story, and they get excited, right? We can talk about the white savior complex another day, but it's a question of like, one, knowing that may exist, but like also being aware that might, if you know how to leverage that in a way that's not disempowering to you, which is that is a whole other thing, like that would be part of it. I think the other thing too about mentorship and sponsorship, I always, again, I'll use my students, like you want an advisory board, right? You want an advisory board, you want mentors, and you want sponsors. And you don't know who's going to do what. When I talk to like first generation students or, people who are uncomfortable in predominantly white, super capitalist spaces, I think, I get it. I know it's hard and there's a lot of things that's super wrong with it, and I'm with you 100%. But if you want to be economically mobile, if you want to help your family, if you want to help your parents, you have to think about how you can leverage gaining the skills to be comfortable in that space, right? And then building off of that, because you don't know who's going to play what. When I think about how I got to Stanford, oh, are you kidding me? I was like all over the place. I was asking everybody and their mama for advice because my dissertation chair happened to be an old white male, because studies show people of color who are mentored by old white men do better, just saying. So I followed the rule. But my advisory board was a bunch of women of color who were like, all right, you're okay. I know this place is toxic. I know PhDs are crazy, but you can do this, right? So it's leveraging your emotional needs with your professional needs with a strategy, right? But again, I'm fully aware that until grad school, I was in like super elite, predominantly white spaces. So there was just a skill set I already had. So I used my position in my public graduate degree, like, look, let's unpack this, let's translate this, because you are no less capable than someone at an elite institution. You just didn't know that until I told you that. And so it was a matter of coaching them and helping them do that. So I think it's for the person seeking help, seeking to climb, it's asking help and knowing how to interpret what's actually going to be helpful and what's not, right? Which is work. But then also, even before that, developing a plan of being intentional, right? When I was an undergrad at Northwestern University, I knew I wanted to be at a predominantly white institution that was elite because I was tired of people that didn't look like me telling my story badly. And so I did a few things that people were like, that doesn't make any sense. You should have gone here. But I was like, but I want to do the work that I want to do. Because that was both, right? I wanted to be at the space and I wanted to do the work on my terms. I was fortunate and intentional and like praying a lot. Let me do this. Hope it works out. And it did, right? I know that doesn't happen in every case, but it was also a combination of knowing who I wanted to be and being flexible about what that would actually look like, right? My plan was not to move out west. As someone who studied Latinos, I fought against moving out west, and then I ended up at Stanford. So, yes. Does that answer your question? Okay.
So we have time for one last question. Melissa will be around. You can ask plenty of other questions.
Yes. As I spill my tea. Hi. Thank you for your patience.
Hi. My name is Nimi, and I'm a consultant working out of Bangalore in India. And, the intersectionality is very different in India. Race and ethnicity is not an area of focus, so it's primarily gender. But I was going to comment on something that she talked about, where when organizations focus on diversity and it's primarily gender, there is this whole thing around the sense of reverse discrimination. So are men losing out because of this focus on on women? And this whole concept of meritocracy and, are we diluting that when we are hiring diverse talent, etc., comes up all the time. And as a consultant, one of the things that I use, and it usually works, is to ask all of them, can you put your hand on your chest and say every senior leader that's sitting at the top deserves to be there? And almost everyone, and almost everybody's, oh no, yeah, we know that. So I say, so why is there this higher scrutiny for women? Yeah, so, and that I think makes the point most times. So I just thought I'd share that because I've seen that work for me.
Thank you.
So we're a little over time, but I just...
Sorry.
No. I think it was perfect. I'm looking forward to seeing the video. Melissa will be here. So if you have any additional questions, I want to give her a round of applause.